Good morning. Today's lesson is going to be over Act 1, Scene 1 of Fences. Obviously, you have your document, and I've got the actual book, but will be accurate in terms of pages. So as I talk, you'll flip over to whatever page I'm talking about. I also have my notes over here on my computer, so if you see me looking kind of left and right, you'll know that's why. I just want to make sure that I'm covering all the things that I have previously said on my notes. So that's what I'll do. And then, of course, if you have any questions at the end of this, you can shoot me an email and I'll get back to you for whatever you need. So if you look at Fences, it's important to note the structure of it before we get into the content. So if you kind of open up and count how many scenes are in Act 1, and then you add that with how many scenes in Act 2, you notice that there are 9 scenes. As this play is about baseball, it is very fitting that he would choose 9 scenes to represent the 9 innings of a baseball game. We'll also see a lot of baseball metaphors that sort of permeate the text. So again, August Wilson's very intentional in doing this sort of thing. So if we open up to page 1, we do have a scene description here regarding the characters that we're introduced to in scene 1. The first person that I want to talk about is Troy, okay? Troy is described as this large man with thick, heavy hands. He's 53 years old. I also want to read to you another passage from the text that sort of describes Troy. It says, "Together with his blackness, his largeness informs his sensibilities and the choices that he's made in his life." Okay? Physical description is going to be important to observe because Troy's personality is going to be just as large as his stature, and this will be evident in the lines that are about to follow. So that's the first guy that we were introduced to. We're also introduced to a character named Bono, who is a friend of Troy's. Their friendship's pretty solid. They've been together as friends for 30 odd years, so they know each other very well. You can see that Bono is a follower. It says obviously the follower. He definitely admires Troy for his work ethic, his strength, and his honesty. Those characteristics are going to be important to remember, again, as the scene progresses. He basically worships Troy, okay? So those are the two guys that we have here in scene 1. Right off the bat, and of course, this was unintentional that I said that, considering we are talking about baseball. We learned that Troy is a big man because he challenges and he questions his boss about driving trucks at work. Okay, he's arguing that only the white men seem to be the ones driving, and that black men don't have a chance to move up and be promoted to something like that. So right here, we see that August Wilson is highlighting the racial struggles of African Americans during this time period. And from Bono, moving forward, we have him bringing up something rather interesting on page, looks like 3, after the whole discussion regarding African American drivers. He brings up some woman named Alberta. Okay, he talks to Troy and says, "Oh, I see that you're eyeing her." So we notice, Troy's interested in Alberta. And he's questioning Troy's actions here, especially since we find out later that Troy is married to Rose, so it makes sense why he would bring this up. We can assume that he's not really telling the truth about Alberta, but we don't know 100% just yet. Moving forward, we do have on page 5 another character being introduced to the play, and this would be Troy's wife, Rose. Her description sort of reflects the struggles of African American women in that time period and the choices or limited amount of choices that they had in terms of making a life. Let me read this to you on, I believe it was page 5. It says, "Her devotion to Troy stems from her recognition of the possibilities of her life without him. A succession of abusive men and their babies, a life of partying and running the streets, the church, or aloneness with its attendant pain and frustration." So it doesn't seem like too many of these things are appealing to her. So Troy was kind of it, and so she married him and built a life around him. I also want to go a little further in terms of examining Troy and Rose's relationship. You can see that he's sort of insulting at times, but it's mostly in a playful way. You can see, like any married couple, they bicker about the small things, like, the discussion of where to grocery shop. They have differing views there. A little bit more about their history. We see that, they met when Troy was out of jail, and at that time she was interested in something more serious while Troy was not. And also kind of interesting, kind of going further with that, is Rose is very aware that Troy tends to exaggerate everything and will call him out on it, especially about the whole marriage thing. You see that she says, that's not necessarily true. We also learn a little bit more about their family. So we see discussion about Corey, their son. We know he's a very talented individual when it comes to football, and he's been offered a scholarship to play at college. Now, this is another area where Troy and Rose sort of differ. Now, Rose is all about the opportunity, wants him to go off and chase his dreams, but we see that Troy is not about that at all. Okay. In fact, he looks down on it and says that he can't make a living playing football, but he doesn't understand that that's not what he's actually out to do. He's going to be playing football while he's getting an education, but he doesn't want to hear anything about it. He believes Corey should get a real job. Okay. Troy's also not willing to believe that times have changed with African Americans in sports, because at one point in time it was difficult for them to make it big and play on major league teams. There were restrictions there. Okay, so Troy's still living in that time when this wasn't a possibility. I think what it is about Troy is that he's scared of change. He missed out on a career of sports because of racial issues, and he believes that his son's going to experience the same thing, even though, again, we know that that's not true in Corey's time. Okay, things have really changed. Notice that Troy also puts down talented players like Jackie Robinson, calls him a nobody, even though we know that Jackie Robinson's not a nobody. We believe this is probably because he's jealous, because he was too old to play when they allowed African Americans on major league teams. So, he kind of makes Jackie Robinson seem insignificant to make himself feel better. We also notice Troy's first baseball metaphor on page 10. Let me read this to you. It says, death ain't nothing but a fastball on the outside corner. Let me see. I'm gonna go a little further here too. Death ain't nothing. I done seen him, done wrestled with him. You can't tell me nothing about death. Death ain't nothing but a fastball on the outside corner. And you know what I'll do to that? Look, see here, Bono. Am I lying? You get one of them fastballs about waist high over the outside corner of a plate where you can get the meat of the bat on it. And good God, you can kiss it goodbye. Now, am I lying? So anyway, to kind of explain this metaphor to you, Troy's comparing death to this sort of easy pitch that's perfect for hitting a home run. This means that Troy thinks death is no big deal and that he can basically fend it off. He's unconquerable and almost immortal when it comes to issues of life and death, or at least he thinks so. I think he believes this way because of a lot of struggles that he has faced in his past. We've got some past family issues, which is something that hasn't been brought up yet, but we will get to it. We also know that, again, he's experienced time in jail, and then, of course, the racial issues and missing out on a dream of his. So anyway, I think he believes after dealing with things like this, death's an easy one to tackle and defeat. Okay, we also see another example of Troy's exaggeration on page 11. This was, Troy entertaining Bono and Rose with this epic story about his struggle with death, personified death, or the devil as a character. In reality, he was actually laid up at Mercy Hospital with pneumonia, and he was just kind of talking plumb out of his head, according to Rose. So there we have Rose correcting Troy in his story. Some other comments about Troy that, allow us to believe that he exaggerates is on page 12, where it says, every time Troy tell that story, you find different ways to tell it, different things to make up about it. Another one, page 13, that's right, I know you. I know you got some Uncle Remus in your blood. You got more stories than the devil got sinners. We've also got page 14. This is with a new character. We're going to get to him in a minute. It says, what? Pop done seen the devil? You too much, Pop. So we know, again, that he is kind of over the top, and several characters point that out. Okay, so we have some indirect and direct characterization in this scene. We also have some discussion that I want to bring up about Troy's name and how it carries a sort of significance. At one point on page 6, we learn that his name's Troy Maxon, and his name is this amalgamation of the Mason Mason and Dixon, which is Mason-Dixon line. I'm sure you've heard of that. This is the name for an imaginary line that separates the slave states from free states. So, Troy's name symbolically demonstrates his character as one who lives, on a line between two opposing sides. I want you to keep this in mind throughout the play, and how there's a line being drawn. Okay, so I said we would kind of talk about a new character, and here we are kind of getting to that. We've got Lyons is introduced also in scene 1. Now, Lyons is Troy's son. He's 34 years old. He's a son from a previous marriage. He's a musician, okay? That's his passion in life. Of course, being a musician is not something that his father approves of. In fact, in the description, when he arrives, he knows he's going to face a lot of scrutiny and ridicule from his father about his career choice. So in this part with Lyons, we have a huge ordeal about, hold on, my notes kind of scroll down on me, and I can't remember where I left off. Okay, so anyway, as I was saying, there's this huge ordeal about Lyons wanting to borrow money from Troy. Okay, Troy goes off on this big exaggerated story about buying furniture on credit, which is kind of off topic. He also harps on his son about getting a job hauling trash and calls his son lazy because he doesn't have the money to support himself. We just talked about the fact that he wants to be a musician, and that's what makes him happy, and it really highlights the difference between father and son. So anyway, he goes a different route. It doesn't make the money that Troy believes he should make. Troy even goes off and sort of criticizes the way Lyons' mother raises him, or has raised him, but fails to acknowledge that, he wasn't around to raise Lyons. He was in jail, in fact, while Lyons was growing up, and he points that out, his son does. Who are you to criticize me? You don't know anything about how I was raised. You weren't here. So anyway, he's quick to judge others, but he doesn't really take a look in the mirror. Eventually, in this whole ordeal, Rose has to be the one to tell Troy to give Lyons the money, and that's kind of how that ends. Now, page 19, I also want to bring up, that despite Troy's criticisms of Lyons, you have to acknowledge that Troy does believe in the value of hard work and taking care of his family. He's just a man with his own flaws like everybody else. So at the very end of scene 1, just a few things to kind of observe before we close here is just kind of overall with scene 1. Notice that the bulk of the conversation is about Troy. Okay, it's about him and really him only. If other characters come in and they talk about their issues, Troy goes off on his own issues. This again kind of reflects his physical description and sort of representative of his character, larger than life, kind of overshadows everybody else. He tends to puff himself up and exaggerate, again, enlarge himself in that way. Another thing that I wanted to point out to you is that the name of this play is called Fences. Do you see, any figurative fences in this scene right off the bat? We can see that there is definitely a fence between Troy and his son Lyons, where they aren't close. There's some issues there that sort of separate them. We also see a fence building between Troy and his wife Rose. The reason why we would say this is because of his affair with Alberta, or his assumed affair with Alberta would be sort of dividing the two. And then, the fact that Troy is not approving of his son Corey's potential scholarship to play football could probably create some issues and create a fence as well. So fences, could either keep things in or keep things out. And I think there we have keeping things out. This won't be the only time we talk about those fences, so just remember this for a later date. Again, if you have any questions about Act 1, Scene 1, just be sure to email me and I'll get back to you.